Showtime. Hey, Yang Gang, what is going on with everybody? It is us, Melanated Council of the one and only Yang. Yes, we are here on Tuesdays, 9 p.m. Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And as always, we would like for you guys to like, subscribe, and enjoy the show. Make sure you leave your comments and whatnots because we love your energy, we love your vibe. With us today, we have a very special guest. I can't even put in the words how special. Yeah.
I know it's easy. I can just
if you couldn't figure it out.
If you can figure it out, this young lady over here, we have Kearra with us today, and we're going to be talking about reparations. Yes, we're going to have a much needed conversation about reparations. And so, Kearra, if you would like to just go ahead and just dive on in with us, let's talk reparations. What is the one thing anybody who is watching us right now, what is one thing they should kind of a takeaway from watching this episode?
For me, it would be that reparations is not just about direct payments. It's really about atonement for a sin within which humans were kidnapped and taken from their homeland against their will and brought here. And not only did it continually perpetuate violence against those people through slavery, but even after slavery, through peonage, through chain gangs, through Jim Crow, through so many different things, even well into the Iran-Contra affair with the way that crack flowed through the streets of Black neighborhoods. There's been this terrorization and just an onslaught of violence that's been directed towards Black people who are descendants of slavery, and that reparations are meant to address all aspects of that in every way, shape, and form, not just addressing the slavery part or the direct payments part, but all of this.
Right on. And so anybody that is watching us live, you guys know what to do. Post your comments and questions in the chat as we go along. And yes, we will blow them up. We will answer those and get to and actually just have a much needed dialogue about reparations. I will put this out there on cyberspace. I don't care who takes it or whatever. I'm the type of person where it's I'm on the fence about it. I know about reparations. I know what it's for, but at the same time, I'm still kind of leery about how it's going to get. I wouldn't necessarily say pass, but trying to find a word for it, but distribute, I guess, or how it would kind of help in a way. And I know how it will, but at the same time, I'm just kind of that person that's learning more about it, because I figured the more you learn about something, the better you are as a person. And at the same time, even if there's an aspect that I didn't think about, I want to be able to learn about that as well and kind of be okay, let me munch on that, let me chew on that, and be able to have a much more meaningful dialogue about reparations. Fair enough? Okay. And so does anybody else have a question or a thought? Again, feel free. You know how we do, round table and everything else.
So Kearra, what would reparations look like to you? If it were to be passed, what would that look like exactly? Because you said it was an atonement for sins, which I agree with. So how should the atonement look like?
Well, before we even get into addressing the wealth gap, there is a 12-point plan that was proposed by the American descendants of slavery that I've always really been a big fan of, because I feel like it outlines feasible ways within which we can begin addressing reparations right now within the current framework of the government. And I actually have the link pulled up here. It's a lot of information, but I'll just be very kind of general. For example, a census designation for American descendants of slavery, so that way hiring and employment data can be collected for businesses to see whether or not people who are descendants of slavery are being equitably hired across the board within different industries, especially in the engineering, medical, legal, and tech industries where there are a lot of hiring disparities. And then a form of affirmative action could also be designated as well alongside that in order to ensure that those specific groups of people are being hired as well. The other thing that could also happen is just a full reinstitution of the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted a while ago. This is actually something that Biden recently has come out in full force, that he's saying he wants to see reinstated. So there's some hope there on the horizon, and potentially room for a bigger discussion about these other things. The other thing would be SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans. For example, under President Obama, Black businesses only received 1.7% of the $23.9 billion in SBA loans. They previously received 8.2% of those loans under George W. Bush. So in order to help bolster the Black entrepreneurial class, it's really important to see at least 15% of that money go towards Black businesses. I feel like that's really feasible. Like, we're not even asking for half, because obviously we don't represent even half of the population, but something that's more equitable, I feel, could be addressed really easily. Infrastructure plans, Flint, Michigan comes to mind, but all throughout the Southeast, there are lots of communities, especially in the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, where pollution is a problem. They don't have proper plumbing. And as a result of that, it's created a lot of health harm. Memphis, I live in Tennessee, so this is something that actually means a lot to me. There was a community in Memphis that actually was seeing a lot of cancer cases because their water was polluted from a nearby plant. And that person, one of the people that was actually affected by that, ran for the Senate, the U.S. Senate, Marquita Bradshaw, who y'all might actually be familiar with. She's given quite a bit of a lay to claim about the environmental justice that needs to be addressed here. Addressing mass incarceration is another thing that could be figured out sooner rather than later. A lot of people consider that to basically be a form of modern day slavery. So I feel like that's another thing that could definitely be addressed. And then I'll just sort of cap this off here. The other really main thing that I think, the two main things, would be auditing the banks to see if there is a pattern of discrimination in lending. We really don't know whether or not that's still the case, but I personally would not be surprised if that was. I mean, to give y'all a personal anecdote, I used to work for the Kirby Vacuum Company, and you would call folks and offer them a free vacuum cleaning with the Kirby, so that way you could sort of advertise it to them in the hopes that they might purchase it shortly thereafter. But if the address for this free cleaning was in an area that was primarily Black, the supervisor of the telemarketing team would not let us schedule an appointment for them. So that was a form of, even at the Kirby company, they were redlining. I feel very strongly about the fact that this is probably still happening on a mass scale. We just don't have any idea how much that is the case. And the other major thing would just be, much in the way that the banks were forgiven for plunging this country into a recession in 2008, it would be awesome to see Black students have their debts forgiven when they attend either predominantly white institutions or HBCUs. It could be a larger proportion of those loans are forgiven for students who go to HBCUs as opposed to PWIs or predominantly white institutions. But that could be a really great way to prevent folks from being saddled with that debt after they graduate. So that way they can begin growing their own wealth that can be passed down to future generations, because it's the power of inheritance that really helps create wealth in a community. So those would be the main things.
Awesome. Go ahead, Toby.
I was just kind of nodding and just kind of thinking along. I need to read more into the ADOS 101, because I know that's, like you said, that I don't know if that itself is the 12-point plan, if there's even more to it, but I know that they've talked about a lot of things, and it's not an area that I'm as hip to. So I'm really glad to see this intersection, to see what people have already been organizing for on the ground, what people have already been sort of building political power around, because that's really how I feel like there's going to be a lot of changes, finding out what these people are already doing and organizing. So I don't know. I'm just kind of taking it all in, to be honest. And that was a really good question about what is reparations. If anything, I may have asked, what was your journey in terms of coming around to this, being an advocate for it? Maybe like, was the first time you sort of engaged with the ADOS community, or in general, what was it that kind of maybe it was your moment of awakening?
Oh, really? Just growing up poor. really, really poor, like no electricity, no running water poor, not able to flush the toilet poor. And I'm of mixed race descent, but I'm half Black. My mother is Black and she raised me. So that's what I know my identity to be primarily. And seeing her struggle is something that has hurt me very, very deeply. And she actually passed away last year at the age of 54 from cancer. And it's been really hard for me to have to grapple with the fact that I never really got the chance, like still being pretty young, to give her the kind of life that I wanted to give her after seeing her struggle so hard to raise me and my little brother with literally no help from even our own family. And when I saw that the reparations movement was starting to gain traction, I almost couldn't really believe it. I was like, really? We're having a serious conversation about this? I honestly never really took it seriously before, so I ignored it for a while until I stumbled upon Yvette Carnell's channel on YouTube, and Tone Talks has his channel on YouTube, Antonio Moore rather, and I've been watching a lot of their stuff, and especially the way that Antonio Moore breaks down the data. That really caught my eye, and then I began to think about my own experience so much more, and how monolithic that experience was for a lot of Black people, and how that sort of pain is something that a lot of us carry, and it shouldn't be that way, you know, especially if we could actually do something about it. And I thought, why are we even in this position, you know, to begin with? Why has it been this case for generations and generations? We cannot seem to climb out of this hole, so to speak, figuratively. And I educated myself. And then I realized that the bulk of the wealth in this country and the bulk of the original, the way that the city was built, even cities that didn't have, or states that didn't even have slavery legal, they benefited quite a bit from the money that was generated through it. And then I realized that, you know, no formal apology had ever been made. Nobody had ever said anything about what they were going to do to actually remedy that. But there had been limited instances of reparations occurring on the local level here in the United States, and then in foreign countries too, most notably Germany, to Jewish descendants of the Holocaust. They're still actually paying out reparations to those folks today. Right. So I thought, you know, this is possible. And although my mom's not here to benefit from it anymore, and me being biracial, I probably won't really benefit from that either, especially like a direct cash payments thing. That's irrelevant to me. What's really, really relevant to me is just breaking this cycle, because I love Black people and I want to see them rise up. It's really that simple.
Nice. I agree. I agree. Toby, you had something to add?
No, I was just saying thank you for sharing. I think that is, like, unfortunately, the worst of circumstances is what will help people onto the front lines in these types of fights. So, I mean, it's good to to hear your experience, because sometimes people like really forget, like, people grow up in sometimes the worst of conditions, and it's easy to just turn a blind eye. You know, it's not really centered in the forefront. But that kind of is like the mission, I feel like, to lift up the very bottom and improve those conditions.
Yeah.
Agreed. Sheesh. I mean, there's just a lot that comes to mind, and I look at it like this too. We had Jen Perlman. She was on, and she talked about reparations and how she envisioned it as it being done as an endowment fund for the community. My thought is there another way where without it being direct cash payment or without having it set up as an endowment fund, is there another way reparations could be implemented? And if so, how? What would it look like?
I think that infrastructure might be one of the primary ways that it's done. You could also create organizations and foundations that sort of, I guess, take younger children and help gear them towards a life of success, giving them all the tools necessary. It's pretty common, I think, in the Black community for children who aspire, you know, to want to do certain things, to not really have anybody around them who can actually show them how to get there. So creating programs like that actually help give not only give kids the tools necessary, but provide opportunities for them to actually utilize those skills and develop them and become real leaders. Leadership development, I feel like, is a really good one. Providing more of an endowment to our already existing HBCUs, I think, could be really important. They're suffering right now, and I don't know if a lot of people actually realize that. There are schools that receive billions and billions of dollars in endowments that are predominantly white institutions. Meanwhile, schools like Fisk University here in Nashville, which is an HBCU that's responsible for giving Nashville its Music City moniker, are struggling. So addressing that, I think, could be one really pivotal way, but beyond just the infrastructure as well. And then another thing that I've thought about that I would really love to see is creating ways for home ownership to be bolstered. There are lots of programs. I thought about moving to Atlanta for a while. For first-time homeowners that I stumbled upon, I thought it would be fantastic for a lot of those programs to potentially be geared towards Black people, Black families, folks who want to purchase homes for the first time, wherein after the first 5 years of them living there, all of the loans and the mortgage could actually be paid off in full. So they would no longer have that debt saddling them as long as they agree to live there for at least 5 years. They have programs like that for first-time home buyers. Something similar like that for Black people would be really good. So you're not really providing direct payments to people per se, but you're essentially creating the guardrails for them to still obtain what would be provided by direct payments, should that money be spent like super responsibly in the most perfect way possible.
Agreed. And I like that, and especially when we're dealing with home ownership, which happens to be a huge issue in most Black communities, because not many Black families are homeowners. And even if they are homeowners, they're not living in like the best of the best homes, and it's like, because I don't have the right credit, or because I didn't have like X amount for a down payment, I gotta live here and everything else. And it's like, in a way, it almost feels like it's degrading. But at the same time, it's like, what can we do to kind of help out? And I think being able to have that legacy that's going to pass on for further generations, that would be one thing. And I agree with you too as well. Like having the proper infrastructure put in place to make sure those things are happening will be a huge lift. It would be one less thing that family has to worry about. And then they could go on to say, well, if I was able to own a home, I'm thinking about owning my own business. Let's do that. Let's be able to have some kind of guardrails to put in place so I can own a business. And even if we're in the middle of a pandemic, like right now, there's something there in place for me that's going to help me to keep my business and not have my business fold because I don't have the clientele like I used to, Mm-hmm. And I find it like, I won't say ironic, but I like the way how just kind of putting this out there, how Andrew Yang, how he's running for New York mayor, how he wanted small businesses, especially those that are like Black owned, to be able to come to the table and be like, hey, this is what's going on. I'm not able to do this at the third, but I need help. Can you help me? And like, yes, we can. Here's the resources. Here you go. We're going to talk to the landlord or wherever. We're going to have him at the table to explain the circumstance and let them know, like, yes, everybody's been hurting bad. We're going to help this company out, help this business out. We need you to not harass them because they're at least trying. As long as they're trying to make an effort, let them be able to do what they got to do. Once business gets opened up, once the city opens up and business picks up like normal, you're going to get paid.
They could have also been made a priority for PPP loans. That was one of my biggest criticisms, is a lot of companies that actually received those, I don't think necessarily should have. And a lot of small businesses were left to suffer. And the majority of those are not going to reopen. And a lot of those small businesses that have shuttered were minority-owned businesses, which obviously that includes Black people. So it would have been nice to see more of a priority placed on that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, agreed. I agree. Anybody else wants to like tackle this? Because I know somebody's probably tired of hearing my voice.
Oh, I thought you were talking about what that Noir just posted. Because that UK only recently finished paying slave owners for their loss of income when slavery was abolished there. I've heard about that. Like I heard that happened in the U.S. where slave owners got reparations because
that did happen in Washington, D.C. Actually, a form of that happened right after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Abraham Lincoln gave $300 to slave owners in D.C. for every slave that they emancipated. But those slaves got nothing themselves. So
that's harsh.
Yeah.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
There's always some kind of appeasement of that higher class, or in that case, it was the racial, obviously, but it also was, but it was still class because it is ridiculous because it was like, yeah, we're gonna pay. I didn't know specifically with DC because I remember hearing in general that slave owners got reparations. It was like the only way that this would have been possible is that we have to pay these slave owners or else society's gonna burn. I mean, we already kind of had society burning. We were in the middle of a civil war. But in order to even get that, it's like, let me do this thing and then F everyone who were slaves. There was,
I guess that's just like the history of our country. Like every time I think about just how our country works and like how it thinks, because like when they would always say, "Oh, history always repeats itself," I was just like, okay, that's just a thing that people say. I don't know how that could really be, but now I'm really seeing it because, and this is just my theory. I don't know if it's even true, but when I guess when you're running for like some sort of office or presidency or whatever, and you're looking back at previous presidents and how what they did or previous people who held the office, it's only been about 60 plus years or so since like pretty much like since like Jim Crow and all that ended and like the civil rights era and all that. So they're not looking that far back into like the bullshittery that was occurring with Black people and and all that. So like when they're learning and trying to understand stuff, they can't really go far back for something that's good. This is what helped Black people. This is what helped people. This helped. They're like, well, we freed them. What else are we supposed to do? This is the biggest thing that we did. So they're free. They still are. So what else am I supposed to learn? That's just like my theory. It's like when they actually research and go back, it's like, okay, what worked? What's working? It doesn't seem like they really go and look at other countries and like what other countries have done. Like in Germany, for example, which I know that Germany isn't perfect after, Nazism and Hitler. But I do know that steps were taken to try to like mitigate and improve. I'm not saying that anti-Semitism doesn't exist in Germany, like it sure as hell does.
Right.
Like they definitely took steps towards that.
And they started shortly after it happened too in the 50s. I believe it was 1953 when the first reparations to Jewish people went out. They even paid reparations to the Soviet Union because a lot of their industries, like their machinery buildings and a lot of the places that they were using to actually create stuff for their country had been bombed by Germany. And so they paid them a form of reparations to make up for that as well. And then the other thing, too, that happens in other countries that doesn't really happen here are reconciliation conversations, which is usually where the conversation about reparations gets brought up. You have to bring the two groups of people together that were a part of this in order to really mitigate the damage. If we don't have that kind of conversation, we're going to end up in this same position over and over again where there's a fundamental misunderstanding between the two groups of people. It's been done in South Africa. It's been done on the local level in some places like here in Knoxville, Tennessee. They recently had a race reconciliation conversation that went really, really well. And then even in other places like Asheville, North Carolina, they're having real conversations about reparations on the local level. So we're leaning in that direction where people see that we need to have that talk. But until we do, we're going to be stuck in the same situation where there's a lot of misunderstanding and nobody really sees where the other side is coming from.
Okay.
Agreed. And again, and I feel as though that just like how UBI got brought up into mainstream, and so now everybody's like pushing UBI. I feel as though reparations, once enough people start talking about it and kind of it's not necessarily explain it, but have a better understanding of it, then that too would get put into mainstream media. You know, my brother, me and my brother, we were talking today, and he was telling me that him and his coworker talked about reparations. And that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, really? Y'all was talking about reparations? He was like, yeah. He said, man, he said, I want my money. He was like, if they owe me some reparations, I want that. And the guy is like, well, you don't know if you qualify for it because you may not be a descendant of slavery. My mom was like, well, on the other hand, we kind of are, because my great grandmother, her mother was actually a descendant of slavery, you know, and she was a slave, and so it's like you do count, you know, as far as trying to have that paper trail that proves that, that's a totally different story. It's like, but yes.
And that's all up for debate too. That's the thing about it. Like the debate between blood quantum or establishing lineage. And then obviously there are people in the reparations movement who are not American descendants of slavery, but they are members of the diaspora who are descendants of slavery nonetheless. And they're not necessarily in favor of just an American descendants of slavery centric conversation, because they obviously were just as affected by slavery as the folks in America who were brought here forcibly against their will were. So I mean, this is also a point of contention, even in Native American tribes. My boyfriend is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee in East Tennessee, Western North Carolina. They have a reservation called the Qualla Boundary, and how they establish membership is not through a blood quantum. They don't do any DNA tests. You actually have to find an ancestor on the Baker Roll of 1923. You have to find an ancestor there in order to be considered a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. So I don't know if we would do something similar here. I think that that's actually what Dr. Sandy Darity from Duke University recommends, is that you would actually have to find in your lineage that you were a descendant of a slave and be able to name them. But the thing about that's really difficult is not everyone, I know that I don't, most of us, I would be willing to wager, have no idea or connection to that part of our history. And if we do, we're very lucky. And I'm very envious of folks who do know, because I wish I knew. I mean, I hate the fact that I don't know that. I get really envious of the fact that my boyfriend can look back at his history, being a Native American, and like he knows who his great-great-grandfather was. They're living in the same on the same property for 12 generations. Like, we don't have that kind of thing. So it's hard to be in favor of something like that, to be honest.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And also, like, how sometimes people, you know, find back their lineage. It'll just be like a newspaper clipping that says, black man, 6 foot, and may have his age. And when it say his name or anything, it'll just be like, man for sale, $300.
This is true. That's so true. William Isom is a Black genealogist based out of Knoxville, Tennessee. He grew up with my boyfriend, and he's the director of an organization called Black in Appalachia. And they do a lot of collaborating with the East Tennessee PBS. And they talk about that. He talks specifically about how it took him decades to find out who his great-grandfather was. And he had to pore over so many materials. He speaks to the elders, you know. He tries to reach out to them before that knowledge dies out. He has to go through all sorts of really old material. There's a lot of old schools in East Tennessee, for example, that were 1 or 2 room schoolhouses for the children of Black miners. That, like, even though those exist even to this day, there's not a whole lot of information surrounding those. So they have to look at old maps of the layout of the city at that time in order to find out who might have owned that building, if they can find any clues to who owned that building, who maybe taught at that building, if it was a school, who lived there, if it was a house. There's a lot of, it's very complicated, you know, it's really not that easy at all. So you're right, it's true.
Yeah, agreed. And I was going to add on to that too, is like my dad, he told me and my brother for the longest time that we were direct descendants of Geronimo, you know, the famous Apache chief. And my mom was like, no, that is correct, because your grandfather was actually a part of that lineage of his children. I'm like, are you serious? So one day, just out of clear blue, I went on Ancestry.com. This was like probably like 10 years ago, probably farther back than that. But it literally, it had started off with Geronimo, and it branched off. And I remember seeing my grandfather's name off of one of those branches. And then from there, I saw my dad's name and all of his brothers. And then I saw me and my brother. I'm like, this can't be true. Like, no way.
Wow.
This cannot be true. And so I showed my brother about it. He was like, dude, he was like, I think that might be us. And like, maybe Dad was not off his rocker. Maybe he might have been telling the truth about something. I'm like, okay.
Ancestry.com is a really reliable resource too. I would be willing to wager that that's probably accurate, because people usually go out of their way to put up their family trees on Ancestry.com, so that way other people who come through can see if they might have any connections or if their name might be listed. So if you found that information, somebody actually went through the trouble of putting that there deliberately in the hopes that maybe one day you or somebody related to you might find it. So I'd be willing to wager it's true.
If that is, I'm like, holy cow! Like, wow, and even then, like, my mom, she said that there was a picture where my grandfather had me as a baby, he was holding in my arms, and she said when you look at him, you could tell, like, without a shadow of a doubt, like, yeah, he's Apache, like you could tell,
Yeah,
you could tell. So I'm like, okay. Where that picture is at, I have no clue. Even my dad, who lives in California now, even he can't find it, but he knows about it. And he knows, the backstory behind that. And so it'll be really interesting if I can muster up enough money and courage to fly out to California and just do some snooping on myself, because that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I would do if I were you. That's what I would do.
All right. Sorry, I'm going off topic.
No, that's fascinating.
Sorry to go off topic, but no, I mean it's one of those conversations we got to have, because you never know, and even then, when we're thinking about the idea of reparations and whatnot, it brings to mind like a lot of things that were lost that over time, had those same places been there, we wouldn't be in this predicament that we're in now, And so I know there's acres upon acres of land that is not even being used. And I read somewhere at one point in time that would have been another way of doing reparations, was giving people who were descendants of slavery those pieces of land.
That's the way it was born, actually. The Civil War General William Sherman allotted 40 acres and a mule to families and 10 acres to individuals, and 400,000 acres or so were actually set aside from former slave owners and their plantations to actually give to those slaves, but it just never happened. And that's actually where I think $3 trillion out of the $10 to $13 trillion estimate would be found within just that alone, allotting that land to people, and also allowing it to be adjusted for inflation. Yeah.
And I'll put it like this: like if for whatever reason, if I get qualified, like, look, at least let me have a piece of land that sits by the river. I'll catch my own fish. Like, I'll go fish. I get my own fishing. I got my own fishing pole. I'll catch my own dinner. And even if I got deer that runs across it, I'm gonna shoot me some Bambi, and we having Bambi tonight. If I could find me some wild turkey, yes, wild. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm the same way, like you. If I were to ever benefit from something like that myself, although my status on that is like really unclear. I've never really known or cared enough to look, because I feel like that's so selfish. Like, what am I going to get out of it? I literally could care less. But if I did actually get some sort of land, my dream would be to own like a highland pasture in the mountains of Tennessee, be totally self-sustaining, be autonomous as possible. That would be ideal. So I'm right there with you.
Oh yeah.
I think about that too. Like, I'm somewhere between wanting to like live in the mountains or like live near a beach. And I was like, maybe Hawaii or
Oh my God.
go to Jamaica. Like,
You can't go wrong there. Oh my gosh, like either would be like way better than like Tennessee even. Like,
no, I'm thinking about trying to get dual citizenship for Jamaica.
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because my parents are Jamaican.
You're so lucky that you have dual citizenship. I'm so
I'm trying to. But,
that's so cool.
yeah. And like, I guess it's like cheaper there. So like, I think about it sometimes. I'm like, I could just live up in the mountains, could buy some land, and then like, I don't know, drive 2 hours to a beach.
Oh my gosh. That's like the best of both worlds right there.
Literally. Literally. I'll just fly out just to go be like, hey, Elle, I'm coming to go swimming at the beach, and don't worry about it. I already paid rent twice over, so I'm good.
Twice over. My accent is terrible, so like when I go there, I try to like not speak because they know I'm American.
Oh God!
I have a lot of money. I was like, no, I'm sorry.
Ouch! It'll come back.
Yeah,
you'd be surprised.
Oh, you bet! You bet! I will catch my Little Mermaid and have her for dinner. Yes, I will catch Ariel. Yes,
in a heartbeat.
Wait a second.
Yes, I would. Oh, I would. I would so do it in a heartbeat. But man, go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, and the question of like the self-sufficiency, right? And we talked a little bit about the idea of separation versus segregation and all that. And like if you had your own land and you could kind of live away from some of these influences, it's like it's so much work to really like, even like when Texas was going through it a few weeks ago and people were like, oh yeah, like, there's ridiculous people who are just like, government's not supposed to provide anything, everyone needs to stop asking for a handout kind of nonsense. But then there's a true point of like, well, there's a lot of benefit to be had to not rely on systems that are not super reliable, and foolish people oftentimes run. But then it's really hard to like have that self-sufficiency, and of course having a community like what they had. I think Freedom, Georgia, where they bought all that land, right? Oh, yeah. So we've mentioned that a few times because it's just such a great like story, and it happened during the pandemic that someone was just like, peace. We build in our community. We're gonna have our system set up, our own banks. We're gonna create everything, and it's a lot. It is a lot to like put that up front to like make this community, but that in a way is one of the goals, right? Where you kind of say you own something, and in theory it can't be taken from you. You can pass this on. You can accumulate more wealth. And I guess I'm in a way I'm spoiled just because like I've always grown up suburb area, had a lot of things provided, live relatively close to cities. And so the idea of like really like going it alone is like, dang, like maybe that is like the way to like empower yourself the most, but it's like it's a lot of work. Like it just kind of makes me think like how many people are gonna really band together and sacrifice. So that's really what I'm getting at. So there's a lot of sacrifice for the greater good, but it does take some commitment to be able to create that future. And for me, I actually am also kind of lucky because I'm a dual citizen. Though I was born here, but I am a dual. I'm not trying to rub in your face. Oh, this way.
No. That was what Matt was saying.
Oil with that fridge. Anyways.
So you have dual citizenship in Nigeria?
Yeah. So because both of my parents are Nigerian, so even though I was born here, you're automatically a dual citizenship, which is like so chill. I'm glad I don't have to go through. The worst I did was I went to the embassy in DC, the Nigerian embassy. That was a time, but I was able to get a Nigerian passport. And I mean, there is land literally there, that my dad has, and it would have passed down. So there's literal land that I could just go ahead and go back to and be like, deuce, but that's a lot because also like you could tell I'm, I don't sound like them, and people would pick up on that, and there's just a lot of finagling. So it's kind of like what's the best way to build a life here, especially as a young adult. And I don't know, because I personally am not eligible, of course, for reparations. So it seems like a lot of us, if we're not eligible, there's at least partial eligibility. For me, it would be like 0%, which is fine. Like I'm still cool with like advocating for it, at least in terms of getting the word out and having people think about it.
Right.
So I don't know. My angle on it's kind of interesting because I really am kind of an outsider with it. So I'll listen and I'll see what's possible and what self-sustainability solutions there are, because that's really the big thing. Is if the system don't give enough about you, well, you got to build your own system. Some people want to burn the system down. There's different options, but you got to build your own system.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about that, but I also know that to be realistic, you can't necessarily expect people to be there. Like, this has been a journey for me over the course of years. I will be straight up and say that I have super anarchistic leanings. When I say that I believe in autonomy and being fully self-sufficient, that's not a joke. And one of the prime examples of that to me was like my boyfriend's family. They built all of their homes. They've got 3 homes on their property that they built from the foundation up. And that to me was really impressive. Like they were the spitting image of what could be really possible if you decide that you're going to forego all of the comforts of your old life in favor of having something new. And they have their own community that's pretty closed off even from like the nearby city. And you probably wouldn't even venture down the road that they live on if you didn't know who they were. Like that's how self-sufficient that they've become. That to me is a model for, well, a similar model. I don't want to be closed off from the world per se. I want to be a part of it to some extent. But I do think that it's feasible to build something on your own, even with like a prefab home. Like there are so many ways to do that now that even weren't available to us before. You could buy a geodesic dome, which is much more affordable than buying your own home, and literally just keep buying geodesic homes until you have enough space to accommodate all of your belongings and your whole family. Like these are ideas that I've thought about many times before, and I don't expect everyone else to be there, but it would be awesome to somehow let people know that being self-sufficient is not nearly as scary or difficult as you might think. You just need somebody to show you the ropes, like what survival looks like. And we just need to obtain the same knowledge that our ancestors once had, essentially. It's been done before. A lot of that we just don't know anymore because we've become reliant upon the other systems that have been here very conveniently for us. So we don't need to have that knowledge anymore.
Oh, great.
So, random question: how did you meet your boyfriend? If he is like, I know he's not like closed off to the world, but like, how did you two meet?
Oh, Facebook. So there's this Facebook group called the Discordian Society, which is sort of like a joke religion that got started in the 60s. That's a different conversation in of itself, but I joined it. He was already a member of it, and we were friends for a really long time. But we didn't get to talk very often because he, lives in a really rural area with pretty poor internet access. It wasn't until I met him for the first time, which is all the way back in 2015, that I considered like having a real relationship with him. And I moved down here to be with him, and he actually moved to Nashville so we could build a life together, because there was no way to do that out there in that rural town. Like there were no jobs, there was nothing for me to do, and I didn't want to like spend my early 20s sort of like wasting away in this rural area instead of like at least building myself up a little bit, because I already had nothing. Like I can't always have nothing. I have to do something. So I said, we have to go to Nashville or else this is not going to work. And then he followed, and we've just been building ourselves up here ever since.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's pretty dope.
Thanks. It's kind of weird. Like, I hate telling that to people. I met my boyfriend on Facebook, but it's the truth.
That's so cool. I always like those kinds of stories where people just meet each other on Reddit or Twitter, or like,
and they weren't creepy.
Cool.
They were like normal people that you could actually be in a relationship with and not like creepers.
Right.
I mean, people are meeting people in all sorts of ways nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, like online gaming, like all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Not weird at all.
Whatever works.
Thanks, y'all. I appreciate that. Your support
Yeah.
is awesome.
I always admire when like people meet like very far away, and it just like I think that's really awesome.
Gosh, it was such a struggle. Like we were so broke in the beginning. I was making $8.25 an hour, and I scrounged together every dime. I mean, I would walk 2 miles to work and then 2 miles back just to not have to pay for bus tickets. I lived off of eggs and toast. I scraped together every little penny that I could to get down here because I wasn't going to get help from anybody. There's no inheritance. There's no calling mom and asking her for help. You know, usually she's the one calling me, asking me for help. So I really had to like sink my teeth into this if I wanted it to happen. And when I look back at that and how we pulled that off, it's kind of crazy to think about because we kind of beat the odds a little bit for sure.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the conversation we had about Black love and how on one side of the coin where struggle love actually worked out. Bam! Here we go. We got Kearra.
And unfortunately, a lot of the instances of that's promoted like are not successful instances of that. So people don't even realize that it can turn out properly, you know?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to ditch that person. Like if they have potential, and he did, and that's what I saw. I was like, look, you've got potential. Let's not waste this. Like see that in somebody and believe in them. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish, you know?
Oh yeah.
Build a life together. Yeah.
That's super. I mean, that's just dope. That's just dope. That's all.
Oh, you are so sweet.
It's funny because your story is exactly what we talked about, like, a few weeks ago? Like in Black History, we talked about that. We're like, you know, there's both sides of the coin, you know, and that they hear your story is like, yeah, that's that good side of the coin where struggle love actually works and it benefits, where, you know, they both find like, okay, we got a common goal. We can't go back to what we used to do. We got to go forward. Let's push each other and let's get through this together, you know? And haters going to hate, you know, let them do what they got to do.
Yeah.
But we got something good. Let's keep going. So kudos to y'all. I'm going to take a drink to that.
A drink of good old agua? Okay.
Yeah.
Just figured. No Henny shots tonight.
No, that was last week. Stop it.
Exactly.
That was last week. Oh man.
What that just said, like, no, MySpace was another place people would meet.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we had a whole throwback. We were talking about, I don't even know how we got in the conversation a few weeks ago.
I'm sure people went on Black Planet.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh my gosh, what a throwback. Holy cow.
Yeah, then we got to talking about how, like, on MySpace, you could get like music and put it on your page, and then like music artists who were just up and coming or who were already kind of like in the game, they had like music. You take their song and put it on your playlist. It was crazy. Like I remember doing that. Like I remember when Jeezy came out and whatnot, I was able to put some of his songs on my playlist. Like I thought I was a guy. Like yeah, like I got him. Like yeah, no.
So many people were discovered for their music on MySpace.
Yeah,
agreed.
Yeah,
agreed.
A whole generation of influential musicians are now popular because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was insane.
Right. Oh man. So going back, talking about reparations, and I know that we were talking about financial literacy as kind of being a component. Now, when we're thinking about reparations, how would we have that financial literacy piece applied? Do you want to start it like as kids, whether in school, or should it be taught at the home? Like where will this financial literacy piece be kind of like taught?
I think it'll start off at school, ideally, like earlier, the better. I've noticed, like in general, this is not even just an issue with Black students, but financial literacy is usually not even taught until the very last minute, right before it becomes super pertinent for people to know how to use a checkbook when they turn 18 years old. And at that point, it's kind of a little bit late. It would have been nice for folks to have that information well in advance. Like, even if you're not going to use it, I know, for example, I started working when I was 15, so it would have been nice to have like some basic idea of what to do with the money that I was earning at the time, so I wouldn't have spent it all on concert tickets and stupid stuff like that. Like maybe I could have invested it. It might have been helpful to have some idea before then. I wasn't going to learn it from my mom because she was always struggling. And I don't think that she was like the most adept when it came to financial literacy. And that probably is going to be the case for a lot of people's parents. So it'd be nice to see a combination of, the school stepping up and then other institutions. Like when I was in middle school, I did a lot of classes with local art college in Milwaukee. It would be like over the summer, it would be cool if they offered programs like that for students that they could come to for free to learn how to become more financially literate, instead of it just being like the basic summer school programs or the basic interim break programs, basic extracurricular programs, something that actually prepares them to be an adult. That could be really helpful.
Oh, but of course, agreed. And along those same lines, I know we talked about, HBCUs are not getting enough money like they're supposed to and whatnot. Is there like a all Black trade school that could possibly benefit from certain endowments, especially when it's kind of coupled with reparations?
I don't know of any all Black trade schools. It could just be because I don't really know much about trade schools in general. But now that you make that point, regardless of whether or not one currently exists, it would be super beneficial for one too. I mean, there are lots of statistics in general that indicate that trade schools are in need overall. When you compare America to a country like Germany, they have way more students going into trade schools prepared to occupy those trades eventually. Where here in the United States, we have a serious shortage. And a lot of that could just be because the reputation that these jobs tend to hold, a lot of younger people are not interested in those jobs, unfortunately. So we have to find a way to create interest in those jobs. That way they'll see them as a viable option over being an influencer or a YouTuber or something like that. Like we need to glamorize those kinds of jobs a bit more and show not only how useful they are, but that like you can still have a great life, with a job like this. It may not come with the riches or, anything like that, but you can still support your family very well.
Oh yeah.
I feel like YouTube is actually helping with, doing some trade skills kind of work, because whenever I look up, how to paint my walls, ignore my walls, it's a long story, but like how to paint the walls. It's kind of cool that, that's there for you, whenever my car would have some issues with it, I'd look it up on YouTube, and I didn't have, like the upper body physical strength, so I'd have my dad do it. It's like, hey, I need to change my intake. Here's the part that goes in here. That's what YouTube told me. So,
right.
And like,
no, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, I've looked up so many times I've used YouTube as a resource for all kinds of things. Like when I had to replace a component in my sink, I'd never done that before, and I looked it up on YouTube. I was like, oh, well, that's really helpful. So yeah, you make a really good point. Maybe in that regard, there is something to be said, and there could be a connection to be made there. Like, I don't know, like influencers who work in trades, and then they can glamorize those things. That could actually be really smart, I think.
Oh yeah.
That's literally what I was just thinking, was when you finished talking, I was like, this sounds like a pretty great niche that someone should get into.
Yeah.
If you're doing the plumbing, the electrician work, whatever, it's like you're going to be an influencer. You're going to have all the kind of things that you can use to sort of draw people in. But then it's like you have the substance of like, hey, let's try to, get into these new not new, but like fields that aren't as highly glamorized, and do it from a young age, right? Because if people are already watching these YouTube videos or doing whatever, when they're young, this is a perfect opportunity to connect that. It's like you're really creating the audience. So I think that would be super cool to look at the influencer economy, and then also linking the different trade schools. There's so many things. Financial literacy, I mean, you already have some groups that you're big on YouTube, but definitely making it very accessible, right, to people in high school. And yeah, like it's so funny because you said that people learn how to balance I don't even know what that really means, to be honest, to balance a checkbook. I've never had to do that. I've written checks. I've written checks, but I'm like, I've never balanced the checkbook. Whoops,
Yeah,
is my checkbook's out of balance? I don't know. I better figure out where let me not make a physics joke. Let me figure out where's the tipping point where my checkbook's about to fall off. No, but seriously, it's like you don't learn these things, and it's like procrastination. So it's like they teach us not to procrastinate, but then the schools procrastinate, society procrastinates, and doesn't teach us until the last minute. So maybe they should take a playbook from what they teach us, and they should teach us the things before we actually need them. Financial literacy, taxes, everything, and whatever we can use, influencers, really anything. Make it cool, make it accessible, make it useful. And of course, if you're getting, cash money and UBI, then that also gives you, something physical to play with. But that doesn't need to be said here because we're all kind of hip. But anyway, that was just my little interjection.
I'll put it to y'all like this. Irregardless of what anybody says, once it's on YouTube and they look back and like, I wonder what UBI is all about. I wonder what reparations is all about. What are trade schools all about? Like, they're gonna find it here. They're gonna find it here. They're gonna like, oh, we got it. Like, yes, there's some folks who are gonna talk about it because it get talked about, and just kind of gonna pull this up and whatnot. No young person today wants to be a mechanic or an HVAC repair person. Instead, we have a surplus of liberal arts graduates asking for tuition forgiveness, and it's funny because even when I was working at a factory and whatnot, there really weren't a whole lot of people going into being a welder. There weren't. And even then, it was like the company that I worked for, they wouldn't really necessarily pay anybody to go to school or to go get that trade in order for them to be a certified welder. And the thought behind it was, if we pay for you to go to school to be a welder, can you commit, X amount of years to be still employed with the company and use your skills that you got done? And I'm like, that sounds like a kind of good trade-off, because if somebody doesn't want to work on the production line, but they're a really good welder, let them go to a trade school and let them get the certification. Or even if it was like working on some of the machines or dealing with the ventilation system, like let them go to school and get that trade so they can be a little bit more beneficial, and have them kind of like sign a contract saying, if I go to school, then, I will be employed for the next, 5-10 years at the company, and then, I could go. Like, that would be a really fair trade-off. And I feel as though that trade schools should be a very viable option rather than going to college, because most kids, they probably don't want to go to college. They probably don't. As Trump for Yang, he pointed out, maybe they don't want to get a degree. They probably just want to get a trade and go from there. But
or even if they do get a degree, like I think unfortunately a lot of kids, especially when they're that age, like I can remember when I had just turned 18 and right before that, I had been being prepped to apply for college and to apply for scholarships for so many years, but I didn't really have any idea of what it is that I wanted to do per se. I was not prepared in any way, shape, or form to take on those loans. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And it's time for the children and the students who, well, they're going to be adults, but they are usually children when they're still finding out about these things, to be properly enlightened, not to just have these things hoisted upon them all under the guise of being, oh, this is good for you. This is going to get you a better job. Let's be more clear about what those options look like for an individual. For example, like my little brother was never really too bright academically, I'll be very honest, but loved welding. And one of my dad's best friends actually had the equipment to weld in his garage and practiced a lot with him. My brother never ended up going down that path or anything. He just took like the pure academic path, and he's still struggling a lot in school because of that. And it's caused a huge amount of depression for him and a lot of emotional problems because he wants to graduate, but he still can't really seem to come to grips with what it is that he wants to do. He switched his major a bunch of times. ultimately a lot of that could have been solved merely by saying, hey, like, let's assess what your skills are. And, oh, you've been welding ever since you were pretty young. Okay, well, let's put you in a trade school wherein we can actually develop this and harness this and make it viable for this to become a real career for you, because you inherently have an ability for it. Let's play to your strengths instead of pushing you and funneling you into something that ultimately only leads to you acquiring a bunch of debt and lots of other issues potentially as well.
Agreed.
That just reminded me of something. My first year in college, I was undecided. And there was like some program, I can't remember what it was called, but like everyone who's undecided kind of goes to like this little program thingy. And I remember I was sitting down with my advisor dude, and he was saying, I guess I was like telling him what I like or things like that. And I mentioned how, I guess he was like looking at like my report card from high school. I don't know. He was looking at maybe my transcripts or something. And he was like, I see you got an A in graphic design. And I was kind of talking about how, I kind of want to do something with graphics and computers or something like that. I always knew I wanted to do something like computer related. Mm-hmm. So he was like, okay, then maybe we could try to get you into like, the graphic design program, which was just the art program. But yeah, so like just thinking about that, even though I didn't end up graduating with graphic designs, I mainly graduated, like I ended up changing my major to IT. But still, that definitely helped me at least steer me in some sort of direction to really finalize and help me figure out, it's like, oh, okay, here's this other major that aligns better with what I want to do. But the fact that you actually took the time out to speak to me to try to figure something out was actually very helpful. And
well, yeah, because it requires like that critical thinking that's not taught to us right away. We don't know to think critically about it yet.
Right. And like, that's definitely something that should be taught in school, like maybe, from freshman year up until senior year, but especially like junior, senior year. It's like, but to like speak about it modernly, you can't just say, what is it that you like to do? It could be like, I don't know, it could be like, what do you like to do? What YouTube videos do you tend to lean towards watching? Do you know about painting? Do you know how to make money in like, in art? It's like, oh, you like, sculpting, or you like, doing something like this? You know how to make money in this? Like when I was in the art major, there was actually a 1-credit course that it was specifically to tell you what you can do with your art major, like with art to make money. that was the whole point of the class.
Every major should have that.
I agree. It's like, oh, these are the things that you can do to help you make money. And I agree. Every major, and I think even in high schools too, if there was, like the guidance counselors, but maybe a different type of, maybe like a career counselor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so common sense. I feel like, why is that not a thing everywhere? I don't understand. If we really wanted to prepare our kids, like obviously we know we have to compete as a country too economically. And sometimes I wonder if people are really serious about that, because there are a lot of common sense things that we could be doing to prepare kids for that in the future, but we're not taking those steps currently. It's interesting.
I'm welding my comedy skills.
There you go.
I've been kind of like with like a bit of a writer's block lately. Like I try to write something on Twitter, but lately I get into these sort of funks. But I wouldn't really call it a funk. It's just a season.
Nice choice of words. Nice choice of words.
Yeah. It's like, I guess that season is over right now. It's going to come back.
It'll come back.
Right?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes. We got Elizabeth Norris in there. And of course, Trumpet Brienne. They in here keeping the chat lively like they normally do.
Yeah,
it's nice to see.
And of course, we got Bat Noir coming in with the puns. And yes, puns are definitely attended. Puns are always welcomed.
Yeah.
and everything else. Ooh, boom! Come on, Kearra.
Oh, what do I do? Oh man, that's such a great question. I'm really all over the place. I do a lot of video editing, but something that's a secret about me that a lot of people may not know is I do a lot of work as a dominatrix too, primarily online. But so it's a mix of both for me, and I'm currently in school right now because I want to practice public interest law. I would like to be a public defender in Appalachia, so all of those things are going on at once.
When you said you're in school right now, I thought I was going to be in school for dominatrix.
Oh gosh!
Public defender. I was like, oh.
Yeah, it's all over the place, really.
Well, that's dope.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's lively. I mean, we talk to people from all different kinds of backgrounds, and it's like it's good to hear something different, you know, and especially in an arena where it's not really talked about as much, and especially not in a more positive light. It's like, that's great, you know? And
oh yeah,
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Shut
Thank
up, phone.
you.
Don't nobody care.
Your support is like unbelievable, mainly because I normally am too nervous to even go there, but I felt like it was really necessary, to be honest, especially since I'm pretty sure like Toby follows me on some of that like social media, so it'd be kind of weird if I didn't mention it. Like that would be kind of strange. I'd be like, oh wait, am I like hiding something intentionally at this point? Is that shady? I don't know.
Is your family on Facebook, and do they see this as well? Is it like a separate Facebook?
Oh, nothing on Facebook. The promotions for the Dom stuff is all Instagram only, so I try to keep it separated. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because like I do remember following you, and I do remember seeing the stuff on there, and I was like, oh, okay, this is different. But it's not something that like I think of it every waking hour. Like, oh yeah, Kearra the Dom. Like, it's not really. Like, if you hadn't mentioned that, I wouldn't have been like, now, wait a second. You and I both know. No. It's like those games. It's like those trust games where it's not really a game, but it's kind of like one of those. Say something. It's actually pretty deep. But when they're like, say something, a step forward in the circle, if this thing applies to you, and it gets very deep sometimes. And then one of the rules is always like, now you can't look at someone that you know and say like, I know you should be in the circle, or I know, or what. I always remember they always mention that because they're like, you can't call your friends out that you know in real life if they choose not to talk about something. So no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to ban that.
No.
Toby is the big fridge guy.
I got BFE, big fridge energy.
Oh, that was awesome.
Yes, Toby. You are, until further notice, you will be that guy with the refrigerator in the background. That's just big and shiny. Yes.
I feel like we're gonna have Kearra on for another episode about dominatrix.
I would love to.
Dominatrixing. BDSM.
It would be so being a dominatrix, or we could just have a conversation about sex work in general. But
yeah, that's true. That is sex work.
Yes.
If y'all ever want to do that, let me know, because I have a lot to share on the subject.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Is this true?
I mean, the whipped cream is most likely.
Well, no. We're not dealing with that. Oh, yes. So, yeah. This is very true. This is true. I got to interact with Mish, who I actually know from real life, and the Instagram page. And I was like, all right, okay, I'm with it. I mean, don't feel. I don't want to put you too much on blast, but it was interesting because sometimes you have like you have to separate different areas of your life. Now, I would say the only thing where I put more risque things is probably my Snapchat, and even then, it's much more of like, thank you, Bet.
Thank you, Bet. We love you. We love everybody in the chat. We love y'all.
Yeah.
Y'all are so sweet. Oh my goodness.
We try to keep it pretty wholesome. I mean, wholesome. Yeah. We could be a little bit, we got our jokes, but we always are here for uplifting and encouraging. Yeah. So Yeah, this is like a true welcome to you. Kearra.
I love wholesome. I know
you
that
don't know,
seems contrary to what I said, but being a whole dominatrix and all, but I still love wholesome.
I would say like
wholesome more so like
is wholesome because like it's definitely like a positive thing for the person. Like,
yeah,
overall.
well, that's true. I have to say, especially since it is like consensual, that's the other aspect too. If you always keep that part in mind, a lot of people are getting a lot of really great things out of this. The relationship is complicated for every submissive, but they gain a lot out of it in a lot of different ways. Many of those people who I see I've known for years now. So we have like friendships that have developed.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you were saying was good, and I was listening. It was just this man down here.
No, I saw it. I tried not to look because I knew that if I did, I might start cracking up too.
I don't care. Do it.
Exactly a week ago, I turned 26, and this will basically be me living the life that I couldn't live last year I turned 25. I was like, quarter life lifestyle, time to go crazy, and then COVID hit. So now it's just like, screw it. I don't care. I'm just gonna live whatever life. Half jokes. I mean, this is I advertise my Facebook here, and people can see this, so I'm not really gonna go too crazy on live. But off live, I'll talk about whatever crazy stuff to get into.
Oh my goodness.
No, but this has been very, very cool. I'm trying to think.
Come on,
in terms of more stuff on this topic. I mean, it's very fluid, honestly, as you can see, the structure and the flow. But I'm trying to think if there's anything I wanted to add specifically. For now, I'll just pass the mic if anyone has anything to say more about reparations or something tangential. One thing I could ask is, of course, you volunteer, you've been on Humanity First, Humanity Forward. I mean, you've and interacted with the Yang campaign. How do you kind of bring advocacy for reparations? Which, I mean, hey, he was in support of the HR 40.
Yeah.
I don't even know the So, but I know that's just one piece of the puzzle, because even a lot of ADOS people are like, that bill is just talk. There's a lot of oh my god!
Oh my god.
I
was
didn't even
brilliant.
Yeah, I wouldn't have caught that.
Yes.
I did. I got that one. I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we're here for all the puns and the. It's very quick, but gotta be on your feet to be on this one, to be on this channel. But no, kind of like with advocacy of reparations and how that kind of linked with the volunteering or right now, of course, cash relief is obviously a huge focus. There's UBI. Have you kind of either had conversations with ADOS and reparation advocates about UBI, or on the other hand, had pretty strong reparations advocates with people in like income movement or like Humanity Forward, Yang himself? Or I'm just curious, that intersection, if you've been able to sort of bring sides together, because that's a pretty common thread too when you straddle a lot of these different lines.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because the initial introduction to ADOS and reparations for a lot of the Yang volunteers was actually a year ago, last year, over at HFM. Through the Diversity, Inclusion, and Outreach working group, I gave a presentation on the American descendants of slavery and covered a lot of ground, not just in regards to what they represent and their 12-point agenda, but tried to create that intersection between folks who were like members of the Yang Gang, but are also ADOS, and what the conversation was surrounding that group of people at the time. And what I realized was that there's a lot of contention. It's not as good of a relationship as I really wish that it would be, unfortunately. And that's because there seems to be some miscommunication between folks in both spaces. And it's really hard to even know where to begin with that. There were a lot of like local incidents on the ground between like notable folks in the Yang Gang and members of ADOS who felt like folks who were in the Yang Gang that were showing up to events over the course of the 2020 presidential election were really rude. Some people felt like the folks in the UBI movement were trying to gear folks away from reparations more in favor of universal basic income as well. Some people think that focusing on UBI instead of reparations is similar to like the incrementalism approach, wherein they think that it's not like that UBI isn't going to be like the end all be all, and that we need reparations sooner rather than later, like along with it, not long after UBI. And we had conversations about what we could do to actually mend the rift between the two groups, because I don't think that we're really there yet. I don't think that we're at a point where we could bring folks from, like, especially the ADOS movement into this fold here and have a real conversation with them about building a coalition or seeing what we have in common, because they largely see us as detrimental to their movement. And a lot of work needs to be done to repair that. So the idea that we had in mind at the time was to actually attend the ADOS conference, which was going to be on my birthday last year, actually. But I don't ever actually know what ended up happening to that. And then we weren't even working on that in HFM at the time, and we're focused largely on getting out the vote, unfortunately. So that sort of fell apart. But now that things have changed and we're no longer focused on getting out the vote, or really like Andrew in general, per se, there are conversations now being had about like how to build the coalitions again, specifically with Humanity Forward. And Humanity Cares which is the initiative that I work within, has been a really big part of what those conversations are going to look like. So my hope is that we can actually begin to have a real conversation, because ADOS is growing in power. They already have folks that are occupying public office. Ja'Cory Arthur in Louisville, not Louisville, but in Louisville, Kentucky, is on the Louisville City Council now. He's a member of ADOS. They have folks in Ohio that were elected. They endorse folks every election cycle. So they're becoming a real force that I think will be necessary for us to be tied with them as inextricably as possible. But I think it'll take time.
No, that's great, because part of what I love too is the campaign was so diverse in like every possible way, right? I remember there were people in like McCoy, before we even had the YouTube channel, there was just the McCoy group, and there were people who identified as ADOS. They had it in their, their bio or whatever. So it was interesting kind of seeing these different intersections of people come to life. And sometimes it was messy. I remember we had trended Blacks for Yang. I cannot stop talking about this just because it happened, and like there's like we got hit like on every side, like Blacks. Why do you use the hashtag Blacks?
Yeah.
Well, why then there's like actual ADOS people who came with more substantive like stuff, but like a lot of people weren't ready for. A lot of people in the gang were not ready for the conversation, because I mean a lot of it was respectful, but they were pretty like they stand their ground. Like they like come with the facts. They come looking for, what is this that's going to sort of hit these points, these 12 points, or what is being done that's going to improve the community? And so a lot of times that the UBI pro crowd was like, yeah, UBI will help. HR 40 was a thing. But outside of that, there wasn't really a lot of knowledge on what ADOS stands for and these different things. So there were a few clashes between ADOS people, UBI people, Yang people, whatever. I didn't know so much about what was on the ground, but I think it's important to notice that everything is growing. Like you said, ADOS as a movement is growing. Humanity Forward, of course, they're having bigger influence. Actual sort of volunteers with Humanity First, there's people growing there. People are starting to go look for running for office. And so if we're growing, ADOS is growing, we want this intersection. I feel like there's going to be more points of agreement, points of conflict, and just kind of knowing like the space. And of course, the pandemic sort of froze everything. But right. Yes, I believe that an ADOS convention, if not physically, at least I would probably like try to tune in and hear what they're talking about. I know was it Yvette? I don't remember the name of the woman you mentioned on YouTube.
Oh yeah, Yvette Carnell.
I'm pretty sure I subscribed to her at some point early in the pandemic or something. I remember hearing some of the things she would say on live. So I've just been trying to like gear an ear towards some of these things and seeing like, let's understand this, let's understand that, let's see how things can work together. Because there are people who at least find Yang interesting and like some of the ideas, even if they're not like, he's hitting everything. So at least it's good to leverage what agreement there is.
Right.
And I find it really interesting.
Yeah, there is. I definitely think there's like common ground. I can't remember the name of the magazine. There was like a digital magazine. I want to say it was called, I don't think it was called Paste, but it actually interviewed quite a few folks who were like straddling that intersection of the UBI and ADOS, and like actually reached out to one of the people that was featured on that and had a conversation, Dwight, out of ATL in LA, who has a bit of a presence on Twitter. I reached out to him to see like what his perspective was on reparations. It had actually changed at that time. By the time I'd gotten to him after he had wrote that article, his perspective on ADOS had changed. And really that's sort of like, because ADOS sort of has like this, some people don't like them as an organization. It is worth, I think, mentioning the other groups that are involved in this conversation and for like creating formal relationships with them too, like B1, which is supposed to be like the Black Americans group. There's the Foundational Black Americans group as well, that was sort of born out of all of these rifts with ADOS. So there's a lot of controversy there. There's also a lot of common ground too. It's really, really messy. Like I still have that presentation that just goes to show like how contentious and scattered all of these relationships became. And I think a lot of it's just born out of like the scarcity mindset. Like people just don't feel like there's enough to go around. So it's like this competition now between UBI and reparations, when in actuality, there should not be a competition between either. They should not be competing ideas. They should work in conjunction with each other, ideally.
I like that.
Let's see. I'm just gonna post this one up. I know there was some other posts that came up. I know that's one, and then going back up.
Oh, is there an obvious best way to implement reparations? Yes. So some of those first things that I mentioned, like something as simple as just increasing the amount of small business administration loans from 1.2% or however much it was under Obama. I don't know what it was under Trump. If we could get that number up to 15%, where we're routinely giving Black entrepreneurs 15% of the small business administration loans, that can make a dent. If we can start addressing the infrastructure concerns, for example, like in Flint, Michigan, they still don't have clean water. Like if we could actually address those things and fix them, I think that will help a lot, because then we're no longer poisoning children and we can actually get access to clean water to people. Those are the really small things that I can think of, like right off the top of my head, that I know, like in Mississippi, I can't remember the name of the area specifically, but there's an area in the southern part of Mississippi that's centered around a lake. Half of the people on one side of the lake are very rich, and the other half of the people on the other side of the lake have like no plumbing. Everything's like open plumbing. So their waste actually goes directly into the ground around them, and it causes the kids that play in the dirt like kids do to get ringworm and all other kinds of bacterial and viral infections. Just, can we build plumbing for those people so that way they can at least have like a suitable place to live? Those are forms of reparations that we can begin like actually implementing now, that don't really require necessarily trillions and trillions of dollars up front. They may require billions of dollars, especially when we have a real combo about infrastructure, but something that we can like make a dent, instead of just glossing over it and pushing the conversation further down the line, and then another generation never gets to have this addressed.
Agreed. And it's funny you brought up the Flint, Michigan water crisis. and it's funny because you're right, it has not really been fully addressed. I mean, even Rick Snyder, to my knowledge, I think he did get tried, and for whatever reason, you know, he fell through the cracks. Like, he didn't have to do any jail time, which sucks. Like, dude, you knowingly knew the problem and you did nothing about it, and then you try to play it off like it wasn't a serious thing. When you have almost the whole eastern side of Michigan that's getting hit with it, and not only that, but that issue flew south. It went south, and so it hit cities like Grand Rapids. It hit cities like Saginaw. I mean, it was even down here in Three Rivers and Kalamazoo, where we were still seeing those after effects. And we're like, dude, this problem still needs to get fixed. You know, luckily there are like celebrities that have been at least trying to do something about it, and at least, you know, put money into getting the infrastructure repaired and restored, because they know that, you know, it's not going to get done if nobody else does it. And so they're doing the best that they can. You know,
Right.
they're doing the best that they can. And it's like, we can't allow this burden to fall upon the next generation and have them to foot the bill when we can do it right now. We if we have the money, let's do it. Let's put it to use.
Right, like we're designating funds for these things. We might as well put certain places, like list them as priorities and special designations, I think, to receive that flow of money. It's really important.
Yes. You know, and even then, you know, if we're saying like, well, we don't have enough workers, like, okay, I bet you if you ask anybody here in the state of Michigan, like, hey, we're going to go ahead and rip up the pipes in Flint and get them repaired, you know, but, you know, pay starts up at $15, $16, $17, $18 an hour, depending upon what's going on, you know, boom, there you go. And then pay for lodging and whatnot. Who doesn't want that? Like, there's people that's willing to work, that wants to work and make a difference. Give them that option. Let them do that. And especially if they want to give back to the community, but they don't know how to do it, that could be one way. Like, put in some manpower, put in some time and get that done. And so when you look back, you know, you have something to stand upon and look back on and be proud of yourself for doing something, you know?
Right.
Okay. And then we got a question.
Or for me, both. I advocate for direct reparation payments and for those. I feel like it's a combination of both that will really create the full reparations package. It's hard to accomplish it through just one of those things, and it is difficult. Actually, Can you bring that back up so I can see that last part of the? Is it just for direct lineage of slaves? If so, what about Black Americans? So this is another huge point of contention within the reparations movement. Depending on who you ask, they will have a different answer for you. If you ask like one of the leading economists, Dr. Sandy Darity out of Duke University, he will say that you need to establish lineage. You need to find an ancestor, probably in between a certain bevy of years. I would wager anywhere in the 19th century, especially the mid 19th century, around 1850, you'd probably have to find an ancestor around that specific point of time. That's another really good point too, that suffered under the Jim Crow laws. People have brought that up as well, that it didn't stop at slavery, that after slavery occurred, basically Black Americans were enslaved in different forms through peonage, through chain gangs, where they were literally legally allowed to be worked to death. And this actually went on until the 1940s. So that's something that needs to be addressed as well. And also, like, not just the Jim Crow issue and legal segregation, but everything that happened over the course of the 20th century. I really like what Noam Chomsky has to say about this, that there was really only one period of time over the course of the 20th century within which any form of Black wealth could actually have been accumulated. It was actually around the 70s, shortly after the Civil Rights Act had been implemented, but it lasted for a very short period of time because of the crack epidemic and the Iran-Contra affair that was directly responsible. This used to be considered a myth, but now you can read about it in the New York Times. You can read about it all over the place. This is no longer considered a myth. It's considered an actual verifiable fact. So the damage has been perpetuating for a long time. And then obviously mass incarceration. That's been a huge issue as well. A lot of Black individuals with serious mental illnesses have been incarcerated. A lot of folks who would normally probably have been institutionalized have ended up being incarcerated. And we have a tendency to treat people who are poor and Black right off the bat like criminals. And we criminalize their behaviors. We make homelessness a crime. We make all kinds of things that would not necessarily be crimes criminal, and then they end up being arrested. A lot of these being nonviolent offenses. So that has to be acknowledged too. I don't even really feel like I can be like the end all be all definitive authority on who should receive them, because I'm always very mindful of the fact, like in terms of like the intersections of colorism and like this hierarchy of Blackness that a lot of people like, we know it exists. Like, I don't want to be the light-skinned biracial girl telling Black people, like, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. Like, I prefer to take a back seat to this and let the people who are actually like blacker than me to put it, I can't really put it any other way, to take the lead on this conversation, because I don't need to be the person who decides. I just want to see it happen.
I hear what you're saying, and I get what you're saying, and it's kind of weird that, I don't necessarily say weird, but it's kind of funny because of the fact that colorism does exist, and I think didn't we talk about that, you guys, at once upon a time?
I don't know. Maybe we mentioned it.
We probably mentioned it, but we didn't really fully talk about it.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those things where it was like, it does happen. It does, and even then, it's one of those really sticky situations, because if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, it's going to create a whole mess. And in case in point, like, there's a city not too far from where I live, and you when you go to the city, you would think they're white. You think they're white, but in all actuality, no, they're black. And a lot of them can trace their lineage back to where the slave owner and a slave, they had kids, and their kids ended up not being black, like my skin color or Elle's skin color or Toby's skin color, but they were more so passed as white, and even then, they're like, yeah, no, we're black, we're all the way black. It's just the pigment of our skin, it doesn't show it,
Right.
We're like, that's crazy. But it's like, yeah, like a lot of people that know, like, oh yeah, oh no, oh, it's for real, for real. You would think that, but no, you look at them, you're like, yeah, no, they're black. Like,
so, like, I'm trying to understand, like, from slave times to now, I guess, like, did they just have kids with each other to keep the lights? I'm trying to understand. They kept having.
Is it just like a perpetuation of the one drop rule kind of thing?
No, it's not even that. Like they would have pictures of their ancestors, and their ancestors, they look like me. They look like me, but when you put them next to their pictures, like, there's no way. Like, there is no way. There is no way. They're like, no, we're black. We're black as black can be, but because the pigment of our skin doesn't show us being black, we catch a lot of flack about it. And so it's like, wow. Even still to this day, there's a lot of people that mistaken them as being white when they're not. They're like, no, we're not white. We're black. We, even if we put it on the census, we're black, and people see us, they kind of look, do a double take, like, no, you're not. Like, no, yes, we are. Yes, we are. And it's weird. It's really weird. Really weird.
Well, I guess that just speaks to how, like, varying your phenotype can be from your genotype at the end of the day. Like, there really are those kinds of outliers like that we just don't see all the time.
No. And even my mom, she even told me about it. And she's like, you'll come to the city with me, and I'm gonna point them out to you, and you're gonna think they're white, but no, they're black. They're black as it can be, but their skin color doesn't show them being black. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And she made it funny. She said you would think they would be mixed, but no, they're not. They're not mixed.
Right.
They are not mixed whatsoever. Like, wow.
Yeah. And this last comment here from Bat as well. I'm just sitting here soaking everything, just boom, 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 boom. Like, I'm just like, dang, yeah, we talked about that in that stream. Like, this is just like all condensed here. It flows, it connects back. There's just so much that I mean, we're all learning. Like, clearly you've done a lot of research on it, but there's like so much when it comes to this, because with reparations, that of course was slavery. But then from 1865 onwards, like you just said, there was a lot of nonsense that happened. And so then how do you account for that. I don't even know if anyone attempted to really account for that, because at least you had the 40 acres and a mule after the Civil War ended, but then
well,
I don't know
that
what the
3
heck.
trillion accounts for the 40 acres and a mule, or the 10 acres if you were an individual. That's 3 trillion in modern day and age. A full reparations package on the low end is $10 trillion. On the higher end can be up to 13 trillion. So then that gulf is supposed to address everything else that created the wealth gap between Black and white people. Because the 3 trillion they determined is just not enough. It's not enough to just make good on that initial promise from that general. So it depends on who you ask, but it seems like especially the leading economists on this, like Dr. Darity and his wife, Kirsten Mullen, have said that they want to move the conversation away from just being about slavery and the claim for slavery, and more about everything else that happened afterwards. Because what people don't realize is like that we still have a lot of firsts that we're accomplishing. You know, for example, this is one of the best examples that I like to give. Dr. Darity talks about how his grandfather was the first Black man to graduate from a college in North Carolina to get a PhD. And he always says that he was the first known Black man, because there's a lot that history doesn't tell us. But also he was asked how he felt about being the first Black man. He said that it made him feel very depressed, to be quite frank, that it took until the 60s, which is when that graduation occurred, for there to be the first Black doctorate degree holder out of a school in North Carolina. So we still have a long way to go. And if we just look at slavery, we don't realize that although we've come a long way, there are a lot of gaps that still need filling, because every attempt to build Black wealth, a sense of community, it's been just demolished. Just totally ripped apart to shreds, regardless of whether or not we're talking about Black Wall Street or Black entrepreneurs today, or, you know, the huge group of Black attendees in college, Black men and women, you know, make up such a huge proportion of that today. So that needs to be addressed. It really does.
Agreed. Oh, definitely agree. And you make a very valid point, because there's a lot of first that's gone almost unnoticed, unless somebody vouches, or not necessarily vouches, but unless somebody speaks up about that, it gives light on that. Is like, you would never know.
Yeah, you would have no idea. Like, if he didn't say it on his own, I would have never heard that story before. I went out of my way to listen to that video, you know, because I care about reparations. But otherwise, that knowledge would have never been shared with me. It's scary because my mom was going to be born 2 years later, you know, after that person graduated. So it just goes I mean, people think that we're very far removed from this. In actuality, we're really not.
No. I mean, my mom was born a month after, I think it was Emmett Till's funeral, or when Emmett, it was something like that. Like, you know, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Like, so soon.
Yeah. You know, my own family, like my mom's side of my family, you know, their whole origin story is it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that, you know, my origins for my family are in Mississippi, but my grandmother left. They were burning crosses on their property when she was really young. She had to walk all the way to Florida, to Umatilla, Florida, which is where she ended up raising my mom and her brother and sister. And I can't believe that. Like, that wasn't that far. That wasn't that long ago. That was a generation removed from me, basically, where my grandmother had crosses burning in her yard and had to leave in the middle of the night to a different state. So, you know, we can't really have a conversation about reparations unless we're willing to address the trauma that we experienced in even just the last 50 to 100 years.
Agreed.
I see the comment 3 to 10 trillion is not feasible. This is something that we hear a lot, I think, when the actual total gets brought up. And then usually what people will say to counter that sort of idea that we can't really pay for it, or that it's a non-starter, it's too much money, is that, you know, look at our military industrial complex. Look at how quickly the United States government seems to be able to muster up the funds for all sorts of projects that don't have the American public's interest at mind whatsoever. But when it actually comes to helping the American people, it's always a question of Who's going to pay for it? Where are we going to get this money? That's way too much money. But that question is never a part of the conversation for all of this other egregious spending. I find that to be kind of absurd in a lot of regards.
I mean, well, we got a Space Force.
Yeah.
That's
for me, the biggest point of contention is just like military spending. Like no American wants to spend that much money on the military, to my knowledge. I think a lot of folks, especially in this day and age, are quite anti-interventionist and would like to see us gear ourselves as a country more towards that. What could we do with that surplus of funds instead of building bombs and building all kinds of drones that are only meant to kill people or wreak havoc? Yeah, the reconciliation. Yeah, at the very least, you know,
like people that I've met from South Africa, like white people. I remember one of them said that like that they were at least, you know, happy that they're having the conversation, or they're at least they were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, you know, it was like a, you know, even if it's like you're comfortable talking about it instead of, you know, being so hush hush about it.
Well, that's how you break up a lot of misconceptions and you air out dirty laundry and you get people to connect when you do that. There are some really great examples of this historically. Like Phil Donahue comes to mind. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the legend that is Phil Donahue, but back in the 80s, he actually got an audience of American viewers and an audience of folks in Russia to meet each other over TV and have a conversation. This was at the height of, you know, some of the worst tension between America and Russia at the time. And obviously the populace was following, you know, their governments into that path of anger and just all out hate for the opposing side. They actually had a conversation with each other and realized they had a lot in common, much more in common than they did in terms of their differences. And that in my mind is where it really all begins. Showing that there's enough in common with these groups of people that we can have a fruitful conversation, that we don't have to mask how we're really feeling. And I know that might seem difficult because we're living in like a highly politicized environment where anything that's super, super hot button is just, it almost seems like you can't even have a conversation about it in a productive manner without somebody going off. But I think that if we know, like going into this kind of conversation, what it's supposed to look like, and that people are meant to be mature, that it might get tense, it might get really difficult, but we're still going to go into this because we need to talk about it, then the expectation is that hopefully people will abide by that, be respectful, and then we can make some headway.
I think about Bill Maher. He has controversial people on his show, you know, quite often. It's awkward and you feel tense and, you know, a bit insecure, but you're kind of supposed to in order to grow. So, but no, I agree.
Yeah, I think like those really like I always talk about this, the uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. I'm trying to think of like other conversations where you've had these sort of intersections where it's like, all right, we're gonna have some maybe slightly tense or at least very raw. I know what's a big one? I don't know if it's Jubilee. I think those like middle ground conversations. I was just listening to one where it said like Black teens and grandparents, which just came out like a few weeks ago. I think I didn't finish listening to it, but that was one. I assume there's something that has to do with white and Black people. I feel like some of it might be too broad because white and Black people, there's so many groups within this too. But hopefully if you can source enough of these like points together and really talk in good faith, you can push something forward, right? But a lot of times it ends up being trolling, racial trolling, reactionary nonsense. Just like a lot of things that don't help anyone. And it's like, I actually appreciate some of the comments that we just had, like, you know, Trumper for Yang with some of the comments there. I think someone up above said something about reparations is given to a country, not a color. I mean, just hearing things where it's like, okay, well, how do you take this and sort of what are some of the, like, how can you sort of answer some of these things when you compile these concerns and what work has been done? How can you sort of counterprove, like you were talking about military industrial complex, and there's plenty of examples too where it's like, look at this money that was basically pulled out of the air for the greater good. Like I know even in the Capitol, there was just money given to basically put up all the fencing and the National Guard. And I mean, hey, I'm not saying that like the Capitol should be attacked, burned, and that they shouldn't be safe. But it's interesting that no one questioned the money needed, millions of dollars, I believe, needed to put all that security in place in the Capitol. Not the most fiscal hawk Democrats or Republicans. It's like, yes, for our safety, we need this fencing, we need this Capitol protection. But that doesn't happen with every other issue. And so I'm glad to kind of at least see people, we kind of have to sometimes re-gear people's minds. Like, why do you ask it like that? Or what, like, make people question their own assumptions in some ways and just keep kind of pushing forward to some solution. So I love all these kinds of conversations. The conversation is absolutely not done when it comes to ADOS. Like, we're going to have to talk more. I have friends of mine who have been following ADOS. I actually would like to hear some of their opinions when it comes to this, because there's a lot I don't know. But these platforms, I love it. Like, if Politicon could have happened, I would have loved to have seen some representation from here, from Yang Gang, from McCoy, from even if like ADOS showed up, that would be so hilarious. If ADOS showed up at Politicon, they would have like take no prisoners. They would have been there and like interrogating people, being bold. And I would just love to have seen these things and just have the conversation kind of come more public and not just sort of these like Twitter drama fights. It's like, let's actually see what people are doing and come up with a real solution. We're just going to take a few times just to talk about it, but that will lead to something.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Hey,
anyway,
I think that's how we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's very meta. It's like, oh man, like I know we need to schedule a meeting. And maybe that should have been an email. This meeting could have been an email. No, but not this meeting. This meeting was absolutely needed to be real.
No, this meeting should have been in person. Like,
this meeting should have been in person. That would be amazing. I can't even imagine post COVID what these kinds of things will look like. Especially things are a bit more decentralized. We don't have a presidential campaign to galvanize around. We kind of, and then even Humanity Forward, it exists, but it has its own structure. A lot of us are doing our own thing on the grassroots, but I would love to see what kind of conversations can happen in the future. I'm glad we've kind of touched this point, at least, between Yang, Gang, Humanity Forward, UBI, reparations kind of stuff. Obviously, the conversation's been happening, but at least in this platform, I'm glad we've touched on it, and 100%, it'll keep going.
I do want to add to what Trumper for Yang said about people are just afraid to talk about these issues. This is the problem. One thing he does say is we need to be unafraid and have real conversations to develop real solutions. And I slightly disagree with that. We're going to be afraid, so just be afraid and still have the real conversation. Like, if something needs to be done, you're going to be nervous, you're going to be scared. We've spoken about this like a million times on this channel. You just do it scared. There's never going to be a moment where you're going to be like ready and brave enough and unafraid. It's like, no, you're going to be scared, you're going to stutter, you're going to blush, you're going to be embarrassed asking this question that you think you should know the answer to. But yeah, just do it scared. Like,
oh my gosh, I love that. I'm gonna steal that because I feel like that phrasing was so perfect. I feel like the more you try to psych yourself up for something, the worse your anxiety gets about it anyway. So you almost have no choice but to just do it. You can't really think about doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Just do it scared. Because you're not like, unless you're under some kind of drugs. But like that might help.
I was going to add too, or like we've said before, be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Be comfortable being uncomfortable because things may not do Twitter handle. Do it scared. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. I was always with the Jones.
Yes. And And it rings such a bell because a lot of times, a lot of people they're like too afraid to do something. But I think the courage that you find to actually do it, it makes everything worthwhile. Like case in point, the first time I rode a roller coaster, I was probably like, sheesh, maybe a sophomore in high school. I was terrified. I thought that if I got onto a roller coaster, I would die. And so, like, had my brother not psyched me up to get on one and whatnot, and like, if you get on one, just put your head down, I'm like, okay, fine. I made the mistake of putting my head up, but it wasn't the fact that it, like, when I put my head up, it made me have a very different perspective on life in general. It's like, holy crap, this is like actually fun. Like, we got to do this again, And one of my buddies, he was like, man, I'm scared to get on a roller coaster. Like, dude, I'm gonna be with you the whole time. Like, I'm gonna tell you, my brother told me, just look down on the floor, it'll be done and over with. And so he made the mistake. He put his head up. And he was like, holy crap, we're in the air. We were like, we're up in this, like, yeah, we're up here, like, and here goes the way down. So if you get your head up looking up, you might as well go ahead and look down. And like, no matter what happens, I'm gonna be right here. But at the same time, it was like we had fun doing it. And so we were like, you want to do it again? Yep. Went around the line, got on it again. I think we probably rode Shivering Timbers out of Michigan Adventures. Boom. We rode that until we had to leave. And it was probably like one of the best experience that I can say that, yes. Mm-hmm. Man, listen. It was just one of those periods where it's like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this scared, but at the same time, because I had so much fun doing it, it like my fear just pretty much vanished. And it was replaced with a lot of adrenaline, a lot of blood rushing, and a lot of screaming, and a lot of like, let's do it again. Now,
and pride too. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, I overcame that. Like, okay, I want to overcome some more stuff because it's very thrilling to overcome your fears. Really.
No, for sure.
And I think we're talking about if Cedar Point is open up, we're talking about going. And I made a point to myself, if I ever go to Cedar Point, I want to be in the first car, first row of the Magna. I want to ride it once. That's the first roller coaster you walk under when you go into the park. Like, I want to ride it. Like, I want to ride it once and be like, I done it. Like the Millennium Force, they don't care about that. Like, I want to get on that bad boy and just go from there.
This is like the first time I learned how to shoot a gun and how like absolutely terrified I was. I was like 8 years old. It was just expected of me to do it because everybody else I was like the only girl. So there was no like rite of passage for me besides, shooting the gun. And I was like not really into it. And I took my first gun safety course and finally gathered up the courage to do it, and then became like very addicted. And like even to this day, like I'm super pro Second Amendment. And that never would have happened, if I had like literally been like, oh, I'm too scared to do this and it's too intimidating and I think I might die even though the gun's not pointed at me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's always a good one. Yeah. Oh man. Wow. You guys, what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
It's 11:02. Before we go, does anybody have any final thoughts, questions, insights, whatever the case may be? Because this has been a very, very fun conversation. We're glad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. All the way.
Yeah.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it's more common than you think when it comes to some of these, especially like if you're talking about being independent and self-reliant, that's a must. Like 2A is a must. That's like, there's a reason why it was the Second Amendment when we created this country. Like I want to actually learn about licensing and all that stuff. But that will be one day.
Well, let me know if you're ever ready, because I will intro you.
Okay, I'm with it. I'm with it. Appreciate it. I at least know I was going to ask about just closing out for everyone some resources. Like, of course, you mentioned ADOS 101. I know of Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know how he's been received when it comes to the greater ADOS community, but obviously he had a hearing on reparations. And I'm just curious about some of like resources that would be good. I think he had like a talk. Ta-Nehisi Coates had a talk with like a New Orleans retired police chief or something. I didn't watch all of it, but they were talking about crime, poverty, race, and some different stuff. And I just would love to kind of see things that we should maybe watch or read that are great topics or great educational topics when it comes to reparations and the like.
I think that the first like really great place, Ta-Nehisi Coates is awesome. He also did a really cool talk with Barack Obama, and they touched on reparations. And I thought it was really fascinating to actually see Barack Obama provide his perspective on that topic. For me, one of the best introductory videos, especially since I love to watch videos on this topic, would be the most recent talk that Dr. Sandy Darity did with the Brookings Institute. I believe it was either February of this year or last year, but it was talking about reparations in the age of COVID. So it's like one of the most updated conversations on reparations out there. It's actually pretty long, but it doesn't just feature Dr. Darity. It features other leading people in the reparations movement that provide a lot of different ways within which reparations can be funded, provide additional insight into the history of reparations here and in other countries. And then they also just like have a really great conversation on debunking a lot of the myths and also answering some of those initial questions that usually come up right away whenever you have a conversation about reparations. It's like one of the first places. Also, Tone Talks and Yvette Carnell's channel, which is Breaking Brown on YouTube. Yvette Carnell streams every night on Breaking Brown. They also have a book club too that's tied to that, but that's a really great introductory kind of channel to kind of get yourself accustomed and acclimated to the idea of reparations, but also in general, Andre, I can't remember his last name, but his name is Andre. He works with the Brookings Institute. The Brookings Institute in general is a great resource on this because they have advocates, but they're also like economists as well. So they're talking about this from like a very like data oriented perspective, which I think is very, very useful. And then just the ADOS 101 website too, wherein that 12-point plan is outlined. They call it the roadmap to reparations specifically. And so they outline like what specifically should be done. We talked about a lot of that, but you can see it in greater detail and also some of the things that I did not mention as well. So those are the first places I would go to.
Great. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to, of course, in the bio of the video, but even just like we might tweet out some just so people can see it. So awesome. I really do appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What's going on there right now?
Look at that.
I have some links for you right away. Should I just put them in the private chat here?
Go for it.
Okay. So that's the Black Agenda page. This really great article from the Tax Policy Center is an amazing resource on how to pay for reparations. That's pretty recent. And I'm actually going to find that Brookings Institute video. There we go. So yeah, it's reparations for Black Americans, whether, why, and how. I'll do the Breaking Brown as well. And they are, wait, no, they'll probably be streaming in a little bit here, actually. Mm. So this YouTube channel. So these are the resources where I would start.
Okay. And those will be posted in the
description
box below. Actually, I'm gonna get rid of this one. Boom. Okay. And then as I'm working, let's see. Copy. And that one is the tax policy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Because there's so many other ways to go about that we didn't talk about, like implementing a wealth tax, which I'm not so sure about because wealth taxes can be really not very effective, which is something we've already talked about as people in the UBI movement, and also targeting the specific industries and companies that benefited from slavery.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to. I know, like North Carolina, for instance. I think there was some school or town that was like, I think it was a town really. They were like, we're going to implement some kind of reparations, which was, I guess, supposed to be institutional in the educational system. I think it got announced during like the summer, last summer.
Yeah, it was Asheville.
Was that okay? Okay, wow, yeah. So that's I think that's relatively big. Like that's a decent size. So that was interesting. I know Georgetown talked about like they were gonna give some form of reparations, which ended up being scholarships, I think, to students who were gonna come to Georgetown, which I mean, you could say it's a little self-serving, but at least they acknowledged that slave labor was used to build their campus. I think like that's a first. Look at the universities that were used, because Georgetown is right there in DC. So like the Capitol, the White House, we already like all these areas. Like if there's some acknowledgement that hey, this entire area was built on this labor.
You do
and
that
then
with
like
Wall Street, I feel like would be the biggest example. Like I don't know if a lot of people realize that when the colony of New York was not a city but a colony in the 1600s, a Dutch colony, that the slaves were actually hired to build the wall that Wall Street is named after. And they also constructed a lot of the initial structures at the time as well, when it was just a little Dutch colonial town. And not only that, but New York City as a whole, actually, they received 40% of the profits that were turned over by cotton, by slaves that actually picked cotton. So New York City, being in this position as a financial superpower today was largely predicated on the fact that they received that money from cotton sales and benefited from slavery.
I did not know that.
A lot of people don't know that. That's okay.
Man.
That's yeah. I mean, these links are all going to go to like watch as soon as possible type and read as soon as possible category. Goodness, yeah. It's pretty good. I mean, no, yeah, I think that's really it.
Okay, those are all the links. So all those links have been posted in the description box below. Bam. And so that way, you're welcome. Thank you. And so if anybody that is watching this, you guys want to learn some more information, those links are posted down in the description box below, especially if you're on YouTube. If you're watching on Twitter / Periscope, Twitch, just type in Melanatic House of Yang in the YouTube search box. You're going to find our lovely faces somewhere on there. And again, those the past broadcasts, they're going to be on there as well. And again, the links will be posted on this particular episode in the description box below. And so that way you can have the resources at hand. You can know about reparations, get a better understanding about reparations. And even if you're still wanting to learn more, all you got to do is ask. Closed mouths don't get fed. Closed mouths don't get fed. And so if you want to eat and you're hungry, somebody's going to point you where you need to go to get fed. Fair enough. Okay. Anything else? Minus the train blowing in the background. Anything else?
Where's that coming from?
That's me. Like there's a train. There's like a railroad tracks that kind of goes behind the house that I can look out my back window and I can see the trains. And they go.
Oh my, that's too close.
Well, yeah, it splits downtown like twice, so it's like half of the city gets split off. So if you time it wrongly, you're gonna get caught at one of the 5 different places. So yeah. It's weird. Yeah, it is. That's happened to me 3 times. So I'm like, nah, I'm straight. I'm straight.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
All right. Other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. Tune in next week for another episode. And we don't know what topic we're going to be talking about, so you guys got to stay tuned. Until then.
See, we admitted it. We admitted it right there on air. We don't really know, but we are going to figure it out, and y'all are gonna love it. All right.
We know. Y'all don't know. So jokes on you. This is us. And again, our special guest, Kearra. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you all so much for having me on. Such
You're
a pleasure.
You're welcome back for sure.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on.
Yes.
Again,
So much.
until next week, peace, love, chicken grease, and all other good stuff.